Funcom make it really hard to support them. From the mass negative reception of the new update, to the borderline deceptive marketing practices, to the disastrous, unforced error by no other than the game's creative director, and even the ultimate outcome of it all. In this video, we'll go through all those details and see if we can guess if this game still has a future and how and where that would be. Let's get started. The update that came out on the 9th of September had two portions. Just to recap this, a Chapter 2 story update, the ability to re-customize your character with new hairstyles and tattoos, new class armor sets, dynamic events, and a couple of new one-time contracts in Harko and Arakeen, and a few rock formations in the deep desert. The second portion is the paid DLC, The Lost Harvest, which is part of the Season Pass if you've got the Deluxe or the Ultimate editions, which adds a new, unique questline that takes you to 3 new extensions of current testing stations, the new vehicle, the treadwheel, a few more skins, new decorations, and building pieces. And with all that, there was a free weekend from the 11th to the 15th, and Funcom's full marketing power was geared around promoting that free weekend. We'll talk about that part in specific a little bit later because it gets quite spicy. But let's start by talking about each aspect of those updates and see which would be received positively or negatively by who and why. Because the game is currently heavily tilted towards PvE, I'll assume PvP players don't exist, because they either quit or are just as angry at the game and probably indifferent to the new content. But for the sake of simplicity, and I know I'm simplifying, I'll focus on what Funcom are clearly focusing on, which is bringing in new players with the free weekend, and maybe getting some of the quitters to return for the new content. I also won't talk about quality of life and bug fixes, because simply bug fixes and quality of life improvements won't bring players back. Nobody who quit the game and probably lost their base will be like, oh my god, I can rename chests now. Let me re-download and install the game and spend a few hours rebuilding my base or finding a new spot so that I can enjoy this. And at the same time, quality of life and bug fixes are completely irrelevant to new players because they will be just givens since they don't know what it was before. And it's not like Funcom don't introduce new bugs with every bug fix. But whether you're interested in any version of Dune or the Lost Harvest DLC, Instant Gaming will have the best price for you. PC or console games, gift cards or subscriptions, and with the confidence of hundreds of thousands of positive reviews, Instant Gaming should be your go-to place for anything gaming. And you can use my link on the screen and in the description to get the best deals at Instant Gaming. You can also join a free giveaway for a game of your choice, which I'll link later in the video. Thanks to Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video, and to you for supporting my content. Let's start with Chapter 2. This is free, and it's irrelevant to new players, as they have to spend a ton of hours before getting to this part. So the target audience here is current players who are already in the game, and players who quit, but maybe they really enjoyed the story and this is where it continues, so they'd want to come back. The story questline, in my opinion, is an utter embarrassment for the most part. Let me explain. It took me about 2 hours maybe to complete, and it does have some story progress, but it's delivered in probably the worst, most disappointing way I've seen in quite a long time. First of all, there is nearly no combat in the whole questline. With the exception of a cave with a few NPCs in it, this is a full-on dialogue and click questline. It also nearly fully takes place in Arakeen, and now the worst part is, the amount of very clear time-wasting mechanics in it are absurd. You go to this place, talk to 3 or 4 NPCs, they tell you something, and then a loading screen to go into this room and inspect a dead body. Then you go out again to talk to them again, then you go talk to the doctor, and then you buy a new scanner to go back to the same room and click on the dead body again to find a new option to scan. Now you have to go out again to the same group of people to talk to them all again. How many loading screens were those, and how many mandatory repeat conversations with the same group of characters? Then the story progresses to take you to another place, and it gets even worse. You're now in a place with 6 or so dead people in a party, and I'm really trying to avoid spoilers here. But let's say you come to this place, you talk to this guy, and he says, hey, those people died on the round table. You go and check them out, click on all of them, learn some stuff, and get back to him. He says, oh, I wonder who's Timmy. So you go click on them again to find out who's Timmy. You go back to him to tell him, and then he says, oh, I wonder who's Jimmy. Then you go back and click on them all again to find out who's Jimmy. Then you report to him, and then he goes, oh, I wonder who's Andy. Then you go click on them again over and over again.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
To be fair, you need to talk to the bartender a couple of times as well. Really fleshed out content. Then you progress further to another space, which is much bigger, the Hidden Archives Underground, and the space is so cool. Really awesome design, great space. This game just always nails the feel and atmosphere artistically. But just like the part before, the things you do in that space are so simple and shallow, it's a crime of underutilizing such amazing environment. You click on a few things, avoid some simple dumb patrols, do a shallow simple puzzle at the end, and a big cutscene, and we're done. If you take the repetition out, and the mandatory loading screens, and the actual cutscenes which you can just watch on YouTube, the actual gameplay that I would call gameplay in Chapter 2 story is barely 20 minutes, and it's unenjoyable from a gameplay perspective, at least in my opinion. Now who's this for? Current players who are grinding along, happy with the game, not interested in PvP and deep desert stuff, and it's free new content for them. Some dialogue, new experience, they might as well do it, and they will be happy anyway. But remember, those are Funcom's least concern. Those are some of the 20k players that are still actively playing the game. And since it's irrelevant to new players, then the target here would be potential returning players. Would players return for this? If you're still making up your mind, the answer is a flat out no. This is not worth returning for. In fact, I feel guilty that in my previous video, I said there's hours of content to continue the story. And I even said it's going to be beefy. This is not beefy content, this is vegan as hell. For a returning player, even if they're big fans of the story, they'll have to return to a broken base or already completely deleted base, rebuild, or find a new spot altogether, only to play this shallow, short piece of content. I don't think this is worth it at all. If you're really hooked on the story and lore, just watch a YouTube video of Chapter 2 story, there's barely any gameplay in it. What else is there to return for? If you don't have the DLC and not willing to invest more in Dune, which means the price of returning would be the time reinstalling the game and then recovering your losses, depending on how long you've been away, would it be the dynamic events where you find random vendors in Hagar Basin that sell you cheap mats and maybe ask you to kill an NPC? No, I don't think anyone would see that as something worth returning for. Would it be recustomizing your character? You want to return to a game you quit because your character was so ugly it forced you to quit? But now that you can remake them, you'll come back? No, nobody will come back for this. New class armor sets? No, I doubt anybody would return for that, especially if they reached endgame and crafted everything they wanted before quitting. Would it be the massive amount of new one-time contracts in Harco and Arakeen? All 5 of them? Nope, nobody will return for this. So overall, for the free part of the update, and for players who have the base game, nearly nothing offered here will encourage people to return. Now let's look at the paid DLC, and the target audience here is also not the new players for the most part. So the players we'll be talking about here are active players who have the deluxe or the ultimate edition, or those who are willing to pay $13 to get the DLC. First up, we've got the Lost Harvest questline, which takes you to a few places, including the 3 new expanded testing stations. This is a much more active questline, essentially more combat and traveling around in Hagar Basin, good amount of voice acting and conversations, and phone calls. It still has the classic mandatory loading screen simulator, where you go to Harco, talk to the kitten lady, she says go home. Once you go back to your base in Hagar Basin, she brings you back and asks you to go to her again. I don't know who designs this, and what do they think when they playtest it? Yay, we wasted 3 minutes of a player's time. Really weird. But in all seriousness, this is overall a much better questline. It has action, new locations which as usual look great. It got some funny moments and even choices for your character. Remains to be seen, obviously, if those choices will matter in the future, but it's really a much better type of questline. It took me less than 3 hours, I think. And as you progress through the questline, you unlock pieces of the new vehicle, the Treadwheel. The vehicle is cool, and like I said in my previous video, it's not a big deal now, it only might be when there's PvP ground combat, as it's more built to be a fast ground PvP vehicle. The rest of the things in the DLC are the decorations, the skins, and the Dune Man building pieces. Now this is where things start to get spicy. They tend to call it building pieces, but they at least lead players to think it's a new set, including me. For example, when they say things like this,
you will actually also
reap
most
the rewards.
likely reap the rewards, exactly. And we can show you some of those rewards right here.
I love this building set.
It's really nice.
He loves the set. With this framing and that choice of words, does this really sound like he's talking about 4 pieces? He's actually talking about this. It's hard to argue that they didn't promote it as a set. And when you hear a set, you think the Harkonnen or the Atreides ones, or even the Observer set. And that was one of the reasons people raged at how they promoted it. That's basically it. All of it is just 4 pieces. In fact, the Twitch drops that came with the free weekend were 8 pieces, twice as much from Twitch drops compared to a paid DLC, which forced them to respond in this post, basically saying they promise to expand on this set and have 15 more pieces, and they will make all previous Twitch drop pieces available in-game in the future. But before we talk about the embarrassing drama that came after the release, let's review all those points and try to score them in a way, because this will give some context to the community and player base feedback. Like I said, PvP is nearly out of the picture, and for the most part, new players are also not targeted by this content. They're mainly targeted by the free weekend. If I take a guess, I think Funcom imagined a scenario where some players will be excited about the new content or feel they want to come back to the game if they left, and that will urge them to try and convince their friends who might be on the fence about the game to join, because there also happens to be a free weekend. And the first part of the game is a great hook and enjoyable, and then word of mouth can attract more and more players to try the free weekend and then buy the game. This would make perfect sense. For a game that has lost more than 85% of its player base, they know there's a ton of players that like the game already and were hooked for dozens of hours. They should just need a good nudge and they'll be back. In fact, that's something Joel openly said he's happy with.
If people want to leave Dune and go back to them and then come back when we do updates and DLCs, I mean, that's fine by me. I think that's actually a very healthy way to play games.
So let's see how that would work. This is obviously my point of view based on my experience with the game and gaming in general. So feel free to tell me if you think otherwise in the comments. Just try to control your emotions a little bit. Or don't, it's okay. I still respond to everyone. My scoring here is not based on how much I like the content. It's more from the perspective of A, is it good value for money? And B, is it capable of bringing players back? So for the free part of the update, I don't think the story questline or any of the other pieces are worth coming back to. And for the DLC, the vehicle is cool, but insignificant, at least for now. The questline is also cool, even with the addition of decorations and a whopping 4 new building pieces and some skins. I don't think this DLC is good enough to make players come back, especially at this price. Because if you don't have the DLC already, which means you will come back as a homeless player, you'll need to rebuild your base and maybe even find a new location, and then pay $13 for this, you will be disappointed. And if you wait for one day to see the reviews and find out if the DLC is good or not, you will quickly be hit by this amount of negativity, which will obviously drive any potential buyers away. And this leads us to talk about the massive drama that took place, and it only added fuel to the fire. When video games are delayed, it's normally a sign that the devs found out they cannot fulfill their promises in due time, or found a game-breaking bug or problem that would tarnish the reputation of their product, and they don't want to put it out at a subpar level, so they wisely delay. If you remember, the DLC was pushed a day earlier, which is the opposite. That is normally a sign that the devs are confident about their content and can't wait to get it into players' hands ASAP. So why wait? Or so you'd think. But as usual, the update came out with a series of bugs, from freezing and crashing and general performance issues to game-breaking bugs, which are nearly features in the game by now that you should expect and count on with every update or even hotfix. One of those bugs was the ability of players to spam loot certain rewards, which means insane gains to those who capitalize on this before it gets fixed. And Joel, the game's creative director, decided to respond to players on Discord to clarify the situation by saying this, quote, "We are in a bit of a bind for deadlines due to having the Steam free weekend, and we need to have this patch out ASAP so we can stabilize before the weekend, which makes the entire thing a bit of a clash between different needs," end quote. And those needs are obviously the need to make good, robust, bug-free content versus the need to optimize for the free weekend to attract new players to the game. Obviously, we know which was the bigger need here. The conversation goes back and forth with a lot of people obviously unhappy with his responses until he rage quits the Dune Awakening Discord server saying this, quote, "Sigh, this community. Have a good night all. Apologies for attempting to give context to a situation that put the dev team in a tricky position regarding patch deadlines and events that they had no control over. I'll just not next time," end quote. Which makes it sound like the devs are just victims of the so-called deadlines. Because, those are unstoppable forces that come from God. They're not the result of bad planning or optics at all. And he ends with a threat saying, "I'll just not next time." Which means what? There is a next time? You're gonna do this again? But in all seriousness, it's mind-blowing that anyone from the devs, let alone the biggest name, would come on Discord to tell the community they prioritize the free weekend promotion over the stability of the little overpriced content they gave people. And then rage quit, essentially saying you should have appreciated me coming to explain the situation. Well, you wouldn't have needed to explain anything if you had satisfied customers. Customers who are unsatisfied by your wrong choices and priorities. But they should be grateful because you explained to them the reason behind those choices, which only pisses them off more. Absolutely mind-boggling. And I know people love to say it's review bombing, and to that I'll say, what's wrong with review bombing? Review bombing is mass sentiment. Reviews are people expressing their emotions and reflecting on their experience with a product. If the experience was bad, they're entitled to be annoyed and show it in reviews. Review bombing is only bad when it's artificial. If someone, say a competitor, pays for bots to negatively review a piece of content somehow. But other than that, that's the true sentiment of the owners of the product. When CD Projekt Red released Blood and Wine, it was review bombed like this. Did anyone complain? Did CDPR pay for artificial, overwhelming positive reviews? They don't need to, because they released a DLC that was bigger than most full games released back then. Not even back then, till today, Blood and Wine is bigger than a ton of so-called AAA games. And if reviews aren't enough, let's look at the charts. The game started with a bang, peaking at 190k players, only to drop to the 20s within a month. And here's what the Steam data tells us. After the peak, the game dropped to the 27k range. That's a massive 85% loss in 1 month. And then it stays around the 20k, and here's the heavily promoted free weekend and the DLC. A tiny, insignificant blip that took the player base to 44k during the free period, and once it's over, we're back to exactly where we were, if not lower. And as we mentioned, this update is aimed at some of those 85% who left, who should be likely to come back if the new content is good enough, and a free weekend that should bring in even new players, who end up loving the game and then buying it and play for at least 2 more months to inject some life back into the game. Remember, those reviewing The Lost Harvest are very unlikely to be new players that just came around for the free weekend, because even if they immediately fell in love and bought the Ultimate Edition, they are still likely too far behind to access everything in the free Chapter 2 and the DLC. So those negatives are nearly all from old players who stuck around waiting and hoping for this to be good, or those who just bought it and came back and were disappointed, which adds up to what I would assume is a bigger, harder form of rage quitting and giving up on the game. If I waited for this long, and hoped for a good new update and I end up getting this, well, I'm never coming back to this game. That's effectively pushing away the most faithful fans of the game, which is the last thing Funcom need. And if we look at the base game reviews, before the patch, it was sitting at mixed for recent and overall 73% positives. But now a week after the free weekend, it's gone down to 71%. Those reviews can be a mix of disappointed players who reached their limit after the patch disappointed them, versus a potential bunch of positive reviews from new players who joined for the free weekend and then they liked the game. But still, the total negative outshines any potential positives. And if you look at the losses over time, the update simply did nothing in the positive direction. The player base is still going down. This is the definition of a disastrous failure, unfortunately. And that's not my opinion. That's how anyone would read those metrics. Does this mean the game is dead or has no future? I don't think so. The game is really addictive. And despite all Funcom's attempts to kill it, people still love it and enjoy spending time in it. Me included. Maybe we all need therapy. But I think Funcom really need to learn from mistakes, and they have made plenty. And according to Joel, they have a 10-year plan. They already promised big things in the roadmap. This is the kind of game that can be discovered at any point in time, picked up, and enjoyed for tons of hours. Nobody in their right mind will say the game is not worth its money. But for an online service, it has to live and justify its existence. Joel is right in saying that the devs are in a bind. They have to make content to feed the player base, and the player base has to keep playing/spending so that the devs can afford to make the content that feeds the player base. It does sound like a chicken and egg situation, but that's why they need to plan better and get their priorities straight. I'm no game dev, but the outcome of their decisions up to this point has been undoubtedly and objectively in the opposite direction of where they want the game to be. So something has to drastically change. And it needs to be sooner than later, because there has to be a critical mass of negative sentiment at which the game will just die no matter what they do. And if we're talking about this 2 months from release while they have a 10-year plan, well, you tell me what you think that means in the comments. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next video.